Is everyone seeing that? Does that look good?
Yep. Yep.
Yep. Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. This is, judging by the RSVP list and the size of this is a hot topic for sure. It's hard to read something without coming across the metaphor of drinking from a fire hose, right? So this feels like a lot is being thrown at us all at once. And our goal today was really to, bring people into this process, think about what this might look like in our work. And Sharon gave a great overview of sort of how do we get to this point and what is it really doing. And my role, I think I want to just sort of introduce you to what is possible, what might be ways in which this shows up, what are some of the strengths and limitations in those applications. So if we think back, as painful as it might be, think back to the pandemic, when we all started re-envisioning our teaching like summer of 2020. And, for whatever reason, maybe I spent a lot of time on the road, but I think of like sort of travel and road and driving metaphors. And if you think back to what happened in transitioning to virtual instruction, we each found different on-ramps, right? So where did you start? I think it's really helpful to reflect as we're thinking about AI, think back to what we did with virtual instruction. Where did you start? What were the on-ramps? Where did you decide to begin? It's often a place of strength or a place of importance or a place of need. And then what were some of the access barriers? What were some of the things that you found slowed you down or prevented you from doing some of the kinds of things that you wanted to do, perhaps that you didn't anticipate? I think we're going to find both of those. And one of the overarching goals of my portion of this presentation is to give you opportunities to explore potential on-ramps. Think about where do you want to begin this work or explore this work. Judging from the survey, most people are on the low end of familiarity with AI tools. There's a few people that are more familiar, but most people are either just exploring this or have done limited exploration. And what I hope to do is sort of give you a glimpse into what might be possible. And as we learned from the pandemic, there are going to be potholes. There are going to be things like, people unmuting and all sorts of other unanticipated, bumps in the road. Some more serious moving violations, things that we had to really rethink the way we were doing things and address. And then, of course, there were occasional wrecks that we decided, I'm not going to do it this way anymore. But I think the metaphor that has been most helpful to me is thinking about sort of destinations and where do we want to go. And this is a hallmark of good pedagogy, no matter what, right? Thinking principles of backward design, thinking what do we want students to be able to do? What do we want the end product to be? What are the outcomes or the goals of an assignment, of a course? And then working backwards and thinking about how do we get there? And this strikes me very much very similar to what we see in uses of GPS. Now, I taught both of my sons to drive, and they are super dependent on GPS to get where they are, right? So in our work in the classrooms, like we think about what is our destination and how important is it just to get there? And how important is it to understand how you got there, right? And so we have a generation of drivers of my kids' age that are going to be heavily dependent on GPS for turn-by-turn directions. They're not likely to pull out a map and think through and plan and sort of see how the landscape comes together. And so we are working in an environment now with AI where we might be students working in GPS mode, right? Where our worst case scenarios, they're using AI tools simply as turn-by-turn directions. And we want, I think, to discourage that kind of piece and have them think a little bit more intentionally about how they're using it. So I want to explore those kinds of things and give you lots of examples of what this might look like. A couple frameworks that I found helpful for thinking about this, and the links are here. If your institution doesn't have subscription to the teaching professor, you can reach out to me independently and I can connect you with this. But this is a great framework, thinking about AI tools, things like ChatGPT, as a person, not as a software, piece of software, not as a tool. And Regan Goering talks about, think of this as a smart friend. So I have a project I'm working on. I just had a conversation with a longtime colleague, and we talked for about a half an hour and I just bounced ideas off of him. We went back and forth. That is one potential avenue to use AI tools, right? Do we think of students using these much in the way they would use a smart friend, right? To bounce ideas off of, to get feedback, to get critique. And he suggests that thinking of it this way, we're going to want to ask ourselves, how much do we care about cheating, right? And that varies depending on the nature of the task. And then what will this do to the process of learning? And we're going to look a little bit at that. The other sort of framework that I found helpful was thinking a different form of person, thinking of the AI tools as an intern. And this is a wonderful site if you want to go. One useful thing, he posts blog entries about AI and really interesting perspectives. But he talks about, for our own work, thinking of AI tools as an intern. And how we use it may depend on the kinds of tasks. And there may be some kinds of tasks that only I can do, and I don't really want to use it, and I shouldn't use it for those kinds of things. And then things that are more automated and in between, and things that might require some back and forth and things like that. Thinking of it this way, AI tools will have all those kinds of strengths and weaknesses that we might have with working with a new colleague as an intern. And we might want to treat errors in the process like we treat that with a person, right? We would never give a very simple instruction for a very complicated outcome and expect an intern to come back with a good result. So thinking of it in that process, this therefore makes the prompts and the process of prompting critical elements in whatever application we decide to use in higher ed. What I'm going to do is walk through some potential examples in each of these areas. We think about the three sort of broad domains in which we might use or see the use of AI tools: teaching and learning, our scholarship, and then service and administrative tasks. And I would just sort of encourage you to think for each of these areas about the two ends of this process, the AI user, so to speak, and then the intended audience. And there may be a lot of back and forth among these. So it might be something I create for myself, right? So I use it as a way to explore projects in my own work, or it might be something I create for my students, or my students create for me, something I create that is intended to be public facing, and so forth. And it may be that the public is using AI tools to get depth of information about specific areas. And so I want to walk through examples in each of these areas, and I'm going to flip back and forth. Hopefully it doesn't sort of disorient you, but I'm going to flip back and forth with an examples document. And I will start out with a couple sort of qualifications. Most of these are psychology related examples. Please bear with me. Hopefully you see some element of your work in this, even though all the examples are going to be from my own work or my own teaching. The other thing is I'm trying to give you a sense of the range of applications. So there's some really examples of really poor use of AI, things that I would probably never do, but it will reveal some of the strengths and weaknesses of these tools and when you might want to curate the process more. But hopefully, if nothing else, it gives you a nice sense of what might be possible. And then in small group discussion, we're going to ask you to sort of think forward and generate some ideas of where you want to go next. So in teaching and learning, a lot of the work has pointed to the applications in assessment, the ability to create exam questions. You can specify the parameters, the content, the kinds of things that you wanted to ask about, and it will generate exam questions for you. I'm going to show you an example that's kind of a hybrid of this, but it's also an interesting way of creating case studies. So at the end of this past semester, I was, let's say it was a complicated end of the semester. I was extremely overloaded, and I wanted to generate a new case study that I used on an exam. And I give the students the case study in advance, and then I have them on the exam in class respond to the case study. So they have time to read and think about the case study in advance, and then the exam asks them to prompt. And so if the examples document is going to be posted in the chat, I can't see if that has been done. You'll see there's a sort of a table of contents at the beginning, and you can click on the bookmark and it'll take you to those examples. So this was an example for my abnormal psychology class. My apologies for that. And I wanted to create a case study of schizophrenia. And I didn't show all of the back and forth here, but I just gave you a list of the prompts that eventually led to the case study. So I start out with a very generic, create a case study, add information on the course of the disorder, the length of the episodes. What ChatGPT did initially was a good generic case study with lots of broad information about what schizophrenia is, which I wouldn't normally include in a case study. The students have learned that already. So I went through and tried to get it to tease out the kinds of things I wanted students to respond to. And so modify information on the course of the disorder, elaborate on the history of substance abuse and depression. I wanted it to take out some specific terminology. This is what it ended up with. And what I've done here is all the text in red are things that I modified. So I went back in and tinkered with it to get it kind of where I wanted. But the rest of it took maybe 5 minutes to generate. And then not much time on that. So it generated a very useful case study with some modifications. And so you'll see, there were things that with more prompting, I probably could have gotten it to say this, but it was easier just to sort of add that piece. But you'll see about half the case study was kind of as is from the AI school. And then with some modification on my part, I came up with a novel case study that I was able to use. And then what I asked students on the exam was, sort of a three-part question. What was well represented? I told them up front, this was created using ChatGPT. What was well represented in the case? What is not presented? What are some aspects of schizophrenia that were not captured in this description? And then I asked them to apply it to a specific model, testing their understanding of schizophrenia in context, because it didn't really generate a lot in terms of issues of race and socioeconomic status and broader structural issues in schizophrenia. So there is a lot of potential for generating novel material that students can work with on exams. It's an opportunity for formative assessment. I took a portion of a student paper where they were proposing an anti-stigma initiative, and I punched it into ChatGPT and said, critique this. And it gave 5 points of critique, which I could then use. I didn't, because this was after the semester. I could then use and give it to the student and say, think about these points of critique and what would you do? What would your response be to those points? And so it's a potential way to give relatively quick issues for students to think about as a way of improving their work. So lots of applications in assessment. There is an article that came out recently. I'll see if I can circulate that after the session, but on a case study of a professor using it to grade AI to grade student work, which opens up a whole series of other concerns. But in terms of creating assessments, there's a lot of potential applications. The other, I find personally the most exciting part of it is the ways in which the AI can facilitate, productive and constructive class processes. So lots of opportunities to explore ethical issues. I used it to prompt. You could use it to prompt students' work. So I punched in here that I put in the citation for an article that we're covering in an upper level seminar. And I asked it to generate discussion questions. And it generated some pretty good questions based on this article. And they weren't sort of generic things that were necessarily wholly visible from the title of the article. So there were some things that would have, that do come up in conversation. And so I could certainly present some of these to students. I think more interesting would be to have students go through these and work with them and choose the ones they think are most valuable and have them put them at the center of evaluating this rather than me to sort of curate the discussion questions. But it did a fairly good job on one prompt of generating things that would be meaningful questions. With modification would be even better. The other potential possibility, and is facilitating potential peer review of student work. So if you've ever done peer review of writing, for example, on our campus, there's something called Muhlenberg NICE, and students are very reluctant and very cautious, and they have a hard time learning how to be critical or even provide constructive feedback of other students' work. They get better at it, and we work on that in class. This is an interesting application, is that you could even generate something from ChatGPT and give students practice critiquing that. It's no longer critiquing the student sitting across from them. They have to worry about how that student's going to work. You can use this as a bridge to developing more effective peer review. So have them review something or use the AI to generate critiques of the student work, and then have students together respond to those criticisms. The other ways is we can find additional ways to support. I know Sharon mentioned one tool that can work on writing and grammar support and things like that, and editing support. I teach another class in statistics, and we could have one of the perpetual challenges of that class is students never get enough practice picking which analysis is most appropriate for a given question. And so I went into ChatGPT and said, well, let's see what it does with this. I generate 3 examples of studies that would use a factorial analysis of variance. And then I started to modify a little bit, give more details about the level of each variable, generate more examples, but that would require different kinds of statistical analyses. And it did a decent job of generating pretty generic questions, but it might be sufficient to give students practice. One of the things I do in my class, I always give examples that are based on published research. I want them to see the reality and the application of statistics in real world context. And so I asked it to generate additional examples, but use published research examples, and then add the citation. And so it generated what looked to be, sort of 3 published studies on psychology related topics that seem interesting, and they're for the most part appropriate analyses for what we might cover. And it provided the citations in proper APA format. However, none of these are actually real studies. So I went to the journals, I did a search, probably doesn't matter as much for in-class practice of statistical analyses, but it is kind of revealing how seamless that looks, and how to a student that may look like it's a published study. So these aren't actual studies. They certainly are similar to what you might find in any of these, but these are not. These are hallucinations that Sharon talked about. So for the pedagogical purpose, probably doesn't matter as much. For a context of a different kind of assignment, that would matter a lot. Okay, so that's sort of applications in teaching and learning. Let me show you a few examples of where this might show up in scholarship. Again, trying to multitask in the context of a chaotic end of the semester. I was submitting a conference presentation, and they requested a professional bio that was a little bit more than what I had in other contexts. And so I said, well, let me see what ChatGPT will do with this, see if it'll save me some work. And I asked it to write a professional bio for me, just my name and psychology. And there are not a lot of Sciuttos in the world, or certainly not a lot that are psychologists, right? So my name is relatively unique. This is what it generated. And I'll see if I can make that bigger. Anything in green is largely accurate. Anything in blue is potentially partially accurate. I could see where they would have come up with that. Anything in red is entirely fabricated, right? So it got my PhD and bachelor's degree institutions incorrect. It got one area of specialty incorrect. I apparently have taught at 3 different institutions, none of which I have ever stepped foot on. And I apparently received the graduate student award for a division that I wasn't a member of as a graduate student. I don't know if it came with an honorarium or stipend or whatever, but I never got that either. So one of the things I suggest, it's interesting to see, this was helpful. We'll talk about this in a second, but I know my own background. I don't have to go. So when we get student assignments, they sometimes deviate from what we know best. And this was a really helpful thing for me to see very quickly and easily where it's pulling from, what's accurate, what's inaccurate, and things like that. But with some prompting, this probably would provide a good professional bio in relatively little time. You could use it to check references, help you build a literature base. In this, I had it at one point, I took a section of a results section for a paper I was working on and say, generate key points for discussion. And it did a decent job of identifying broad issues that I should think about addressing. And then what's kind of intriguing, and I don't, if others have tried this, but look for patterns in data. So there's an interesting possibilities for qualitative analysis. So I took an old study that I had done many years ago, and where we had asked adults with Asperger syndrome and parents of individuals with Asperger syndrome to share their school experiences. And one of the questions we asked was, what is something that you wish teachers knew or understood better about Asperger syndrome? And I mistakenly hit enter before I pasted the actual responses in it, and it still gave me 5 pretty good core themes, which is telling. And then I pasted a segment of the responses in. One of the challenges is ChatGPT only accepts certain length prompts, so I couldn't put all of the data in. I think that's changing, and I think other tools may do a better job with that. But after, sort of just 2 prompts, which is probably inadequate, but it was for the purposes of demonstration, it did a pretty good job of identifying themes and linking it to actual quotes from the data. And so this was really pretty interesting. So challenges with social conventions and understanding. They really don't understand the need for social conventions, saying things like, how do you think this it's not useful? It pulled actual quotes from our survey data and for the most part appropriately classified them under these links. I would think that you wouldn't ever want to use this by itself, but this, especially working with students on qualitative data, this might be an interesting bridge or scaffolding to getting them to work with qualitative data. You could even have them analyze the data separately and compare it with ChatGPT and start talking about those things. So there's some interesting sort of scholarly applications and pedagogical applications of that. And then the last area is recruitment and retention service administrative applications. There's a lot being written about using this in admissions. There's a potential to use this to sort of self-reflect and self-assessment kinds of things. And so again, as part of preparation for this, I just started playing with all sorts of things. I put in our department website, and I asked it to summarize the key strengths and weaknesses of the psychology program at Muhlenberg to see what it would do. And to be honest, most of these were pretty generic for small liberal arts colleges, right? Nothing here. It did pick out our emphasis on community engagement. And then for weaknesses, almost all of them were based on sort of size of things that would be limitations of almost any small institution. But, I thought about, this could be a potential workshop exercise as a department to sort of say, what does our program look like? What might be some interpretations? I don't know whether students will start using these kinds of tools to choose among schools or to look at programs, but it seemed to be a helpful exercise, at least as a department level, to do. The next one I tried was letters of recommendation. Again, tons of sort of ethical issues here. And this is what I put in, write a letter of recommendation for Jane Doe, and I used 7 basic details. This is all I put in. And again, single prompt drive-bys are probably not the way to go, but for illustration purposes, just to see what you would get with this. So the degree she's applying for, how long I've known her, what classes, double major in psych and anthropology, 3 sort of generic attributes of a good student, and 2 areas of improvement. So I didn't really give it that much, and it generated sort of a template. And then what I'm going to show you below, anything that's in blue was like a substantive piece of information that I didn't really specifically request. And so I thought that was helpful to look at. So what is it taking and where is it extending beyond the prompt? And so most of it is a, kind of typical letter of recommendation and structure and writing. what's interesting, it sort of makes some inferences, or appears to make some inferences based on the attributes that I put in. What I thought was really most interesting was it took the fact that Jane was a double major in psychology and anthropology and made some pretty good statements about the value of an interdisciplinary approach for providing a unique perspective on human behavior and cultural diversity. So it didn't just sort of spit back what I had. It actually was taking it and using it and generating something something new. So you can look through those in more detail and see anything that was in blue is something I think was not directly asked for, but it was something that was generated beyond that. But this took all of 30 seconds to do. We can streamline routine tasks, summarize documents, announcements, all sorts of our routine activities. Might be an area where we see AI tools coming in, not just reflected in the classroom or in student work. So I want to transition and give you all an opportunity to sort of explore this, but I want to leave you with a few questions, considerations as you think about what your on-ramp is going to be for AI. I think it's not all that productive to think this is just going to go away. It's going to be a part of our work, and the question is how and where are we going to see the most significant impact. So one thing to consider that was really meaningful to me, because I spend a lot of time on our campus talking about workload and issues of burnout and efficiency of our work. To what extent could AI reallocate time from less important or less desirable elements to more substantive meaning? So what does it create for you? Could it create time in ways that provide for more meaningful interactions with students, or for more meaningful time with your scholarship? In what areas would this make the most sense for you? Where would you like to take time from, or where could you, if you could do it well, where could you take time from, and where would you like to put that time? And I think it's always helpful to think about how much oversight is needed for a given task, right? Certainly a letter of recommendation is something that you'd want to carefully curate if you're going to generate anything with that. Classroom materials, exam materials, and things like that. You want to make sure that you're asking questions. You would not trust that to AI with little curation. The other thing is, I think, very relevant to classroom-based applications, but I think broadly, is what form should the final process take? What do we want to see in the end? So typically, if we give students a final product, so in my class this semester, it was students had to generate a mini proposal for an anti-stigma initiative for mental health issues, abnormal psych. And of course, we start with the initial assignment guidelines, where I'm describing what the goals of the assignment are, what the tasks are that are involved in this. And if that's all that I really give students, there is sort of a huge gap in the trajectory of work. And so assignments where you sort of give an initial prompt and then there's a final product are really susceptible to use of AI in ways that are difficult to detect and then are counterproductive to learning. So I think it's important that we ask ourselves how much of the trajectory of the work is visible to us now, and how important is it for you to see the full trajectory? So there might be some things where the final product really, you can imagine some workplace environments, the final product is really the most important thing. How you got there doesn't matter as much. Did you use turn-by-turn directions, or did you find your own way there? But I think in most of the things we do in the classroom, we want to make more of this trajectory visible. And so if I think about the things that are involved in this project, proposing a topic, reviewing what's out there, analyzing the different possible approaches, all these steps in between, each and every one of them could be done with ChatGPT or some other AI tool. And so I want to make that as visible as I can, because otherwise I don't have a good sense of how much of that final product is really the student's work and how much was done. So ideally, the AI tools can help augment rather than replace the student work in these areas. And so I might think about putting several touch points in along this process where, yes, they may use ChatGPT or some other AI related tool, but I have a point in class where I can check in and have a conversation, or they can get feedback from peers, where there is an opportunity to see their thinking. And then if they go back and they continue to use it, that's okay. But at least I'm getting up points of contact where I'm seeing a little bit more of the learning process. That's going to require much more careful design and thought about the way we're doing, especially writing kinds of assignments where much of the work is done outside of the classroom space. Of course, there's issues of academic integrity. This has dominated a lot of the early conversations of this. And I know on our campus and in other conversations that we're trying to think more broadly. It's not just about detecting academic integrity, but those are certainly serious issues. And I'll use my bio example as a starting point here. If we think about the areas in which we know best, in those areas, we're best able to discern the accuracy of information, right? So I obviously know myself better than anyone else hopefully knows me. But we're really not working on self-related things that much. But in my specialty, so if a student submits a piece of work on ADHD, I am much more likely to know about the accuracy of the information and what's missing and whether they're citing things appropriately without having to do a lot of tracking down on my own. As I get outside my specialty, other general things in psychology, I'm better able, but things could more easily slip by. And then, things that I would be generally informed of. The question then becomes like, how important is accuracy of information and how able am I to discern it? Do I really want to check every reference in a student's paper? If the student has 30 references in a paper, am I really going to go and check each one of those? Is that something? And so I think thinking about our ability to discern accuracy of information will dictate how much support we want to build into those tasks. And I'll give a quick advertisement for Tim and Lisa's presentation next week. And I think, our goal today is really to explore what's possible, the introduction. The next two presentations are going to be fantastic in terms of digging in and really thinking about how to get these things integrated into our work. So their presentation will be on creating AI savvy assignments, which I love that phrase, and where that fits into sort of issues of academic integrity and learning. And then the following week, Tracy and Ting Ting are going to talk about issues of equity and inclusion, and what ways might these tools either support or detract from equity and inclusion in our work. There are paid versions of some of these that give you better access, and that becomes an issue just like we saw when the pandemic came. So access issues start to have cascading effects throughout the learning process. So their presentation is on the 13th. What I'd like to do now is sort of transition and have you play a little bit with these topics. We can take some questions at the end, but you're going to link, and I'm assuming it's in the chat. I'm going to stop my share, but you're going to get to a Google Doc that has a table at the beginning like this. And if you go, and if you're randomly assigned to group 6, you can click on group 6 and then jump to your slide. And then as a group, you don't have to identify who you are. Just put in what would you like to explore or learn more about, or you could even put what questions do you have moving forward. We're going to take this information and feed it to the subsequent presenters. And among the LVAIC CTL directors, we're going to take this information and try to identify what are the areas of need that there's a lot of interest, and we can develop programming over the next year to help support. So with your group, talk about what we've been discussing today, and start to put your responses into this document. And we'll come back as a large group for some Q&A, and hopefully the last 10 minutes or so. So Charlene, do you have the
yeah.
Stop sharing my.
Yep, Mark.
Hopefully you all had a good discussion. Looks like some fascinating things in the group.
Yeah.
I'm
excited to
document.
go through this.
We are going to share this with the other presenters in the series, and perhaps put it into a digestible form and share it more broadly. Are there, you can use the Q&A feature, raise your hand. Are there questions that came up in your group that you think would be beneficial to the whole group to hear and to get thoughts on?
I think we had even chosen Anna as our representative, so I'm sure Anna should be ready to share our thoughts.
I'm sorry, that was breaking up on my end.
Something that our group talked about, so we were group 17,
Okay.
and so something that our group talked about in a couple, we talked about a lot of interesting things, but we talked about the difference between this tool seeming to change what we teach rather than how we teach. And that is just sort of a different way of conceptualizing changes in the curriculum or the classroom, that in the past we felt like technology has changed how we teach, but not necessarily the content. And that makes this conversation different and interesting.
Are there other comments? Yeah, Andre?
Yeah, so someone in our group brought up the really, I think, great analogy of using a calculator, right? So some of us in our generation of like, okay, well, we used to do math in our heads and we would do everything in our heads, and then the more recent generations of college students use a calculator, right? And so they can, why know how to do math if you can just use a calculator? But then, we talked about the challenges of using a calculator. Students who can use a calculator, but they don't know what to put into the calculator. And they don't necessarily know that the answer they're getting out of the calculator can't possibly be right. And so we kind of lamented this loss of the process, right? Talking about the process of getting from a question to learning about the answer to getting to an answer, which allows you then to figure out if the answer is correct, as opposed to plugging in a question and getting an answer out and losing that process. And so like the calculator analogy to me really struck home. It's like, this is the same problem, is that people will be able to put in a question, will get an answer, but without going through the process of getting the answer, have no grounding and no ability to really be able to determine whether the answer is at all reasonable or correct, because the process kind of takes you through. So I think we're going to face the same problems that some of us see in students who do calculator work. We're going to see the same kinds of problems, but kind of expand beyond kind of math and science into broader fields.
When we talked about that with language conventions, that you need to evaluate the output. So the output can help you increase your language. So if you're not a native English speaker, you can use chatbot to help you figure out the correct conventions or to get your language a little bit better. But you also need to be able to evaluate that output and understand whether that output is accurate and whether it is the correct language conventions. So it's an interesting piece that, again, if you don't know the process, then you might have output that makes absolutely no sense. But if used correctly, it can help enhance your work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see the same with statistical analysis programs. I
Yeah.
tell students that they're very much like a Labrador Retriever. They want to please. They will, if it can do it, it will do it. It's up to you to understand what it's giving you, whether it's meaningful or not. Luann, you had your hand up.
I think you're muted.
Yeah, I am. I had to find all of the buttons and then I'll lower my hand when I'm done talking. So to kind of build on the question of learning the process, I think in our group, one of the things that we realized was just how many students think of education not really as process, but as transaction. So that it doesn't really matter to many of our students whether they learn things, but whether they get through the course and then get the degree. So especially for writing classes, those are lower level courses where they're just quote unquote fulfilling an elective that they need to take, but it's not really what they want to get to. I think we have to think about how to teach them to use the AI tools as a way to help the learning process, but we also have to figure out how to value the learning process. because it does, for some students, it doesn't matter whether they learn or not. It matters whether they get the grade they need to move on to the next level.
Also, let us not forget that Socrates lamented the invention of writing. He complained that that is going to do tricks with our memory. So I just want to let you know.
I see in the chat, Karen, the idea regarding the difference between digital citizenship and physical. Does anyone from group 4 want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I can, and maybe Yvonne wants to expand on it, but I didn't want to throw her under the bus or anything. So since I posted it, I might as well unmute. But yeah, Yvonne from the education department at Cedar Crest had mentioned that she was very interested in the ISTE, so ISTE, which is a International Society, hopefully I get it right, of Technology for Educators. So there is one thing that they assess for their, education students starting to become teachers in their identity as a digital citizen. So I thought that that was an interesting aspect to kind of challenge our students with this idea of what is your digital citizenship. And for each student, just like for citizenship, we might, even in this room, think of that a little bit differently, but hopefully there are core tenets to the way that you behave, the way that you treat others, I guess you would categorize it as ethical standing in just the way that you would want to approach a community that you want to belong in. So I think that our digital citizenship is much broader than that because, we do have different ideas of citizenship at the local, regional, national, and international levels. And it will, I think, change depending on the person. And now we're kind of throwing in this idea of digital citizenship, which of course our students and all of us have different levels of citizenship there. And it could be the communities that you belong to. So if you're in a gaming community, maybe your ideals are a little bit different there. Maybe you would use certain language there that you wouldn't use if you were trying to, enact it during the education or contributing to an academic field. So it's an interesting ideal of identity, I guess, as a larger umbrella, which I find very interesting. And I guess to link it back to Andre's point about compressing time and using this technology to do so, it's this idea of your values and how you put that in the forefront. So making those decisions, confronting the student with, well, how do you want to represent your identity? And they might not think of it like that, right? They think, well, I just need to get through this class, like we just heard. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, well, how are you treating this project that's in front of you that's representing who you are? And do you want to cheat? Do you want to cut corners? Is that who you are? So making it a little bit more about identity, which I think definitely resides more in the forefront with our students, this idea of authenticity and identity. So maybe that's the angle that will speak to them versus like, well, it's, academic integrity. They're like, well, I don't really care, So, just making it, I think, relevant to take it away from that transaction and make it more transformational.
So just to follow up on that. So, I mean, I think we already sort of have, without AI, even like the digital citizenship, right? Because of social media. So are you saying now this is sort of a whole new dimension ethically and access wise and tool use wise? I mean, is that a new sort of avenue that's opened up for digital? I like the idea of digital citizenship.
Yeah, sure.
And I think we should be teaching our students about good digital citizenship. So
I think for me, one of the things at DeSales that I'm excited about, and my DeSales colleagues are probably going to groan as soon as I say this because they've heard me say this a bunch of times, but just that idea of, the liberal arts education, right? So it is with artificial intelligence, seeing this resurgence again, where you cannot just be the biology student, right? It's becoming much more relevant to go take a computer science class,
Mm.
to, value that intro to poetry class. Whereas before, and I still think our students see this, but the relevance of the final product, right? You graduate, and now what are you going to do?
Mhm.
Is looking for those skills of multiple disciplinary woven in. So
Right.
if you don't have that, you are not employable. And this
Right.
is also seen at the internship level. It's just, allowing students to recognize that full braid of the liberal arts education is much more relevant in the artificial intelligence age. So going back to the idea of like digital citizenship, I don't think it's a new thing. I think we all have had this, with social media and that side of things, but the social media aspect is more about, yourself and, kind of posting things that are on your mind, or, it can be very recreational in that aspect. But for this side of digital citizenship, I feel like the students don't really recognize that part of what they are engaging in with artificial intelligence when they bring it into their education is that it's like your reputation. So I guess there is that reputation aspect for social media and curating that space of, what you want to be seen to the world. But because of that comfort level that they have for that social engagement, it's sort of like playing kickball in the backyard, or, playing basketball, a pickup game of basketball. And then you go to the varsity team and all of a sudden the game has changed, you know what I mean? So it's very different in that you have to behave in a different way. And just because you played a pickup game of basketball doesn't mean you're going to be competitive on the varsity court, because you have to understand the other rules that are in play for, that space. And that space that we're talking about at that varsity level is the academic realm and the next step, the next chapter. It's no longer the fun and games. It is still, you still have that, but you need to be able to be, kind of straighten up, button up, and be able to play in this same ecosystem that's going to be very, very competitive with, just technology in general.
And I think you actually bring up a really good point, which is, and I think liberal arts institutions are probably really well positioned for this, is the AI proof career, right? In other words, we want to produce graduates who are going to be able to go out there and find jobs that are not going to be taken by AI. And it seems to me liberal arts in particular is a good pathway towards that. And I think, that is going to affect how we are in the classroom, how we use AI, how we teach our students to use AI and to think about AI. So I think that is all your points are really excellent.
Chris, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. This has been a fascinating discussion. And I want to quickly piggyback on something that Karen was just saying, and then add something from my group, which was group 3. The ethical issue in terms of who we want to be, what are we doing? I'll out myself as a practitioner of ungrading. And I think that that's a place where those questions have tended to surface a lot in the last few years, asking students, well, why are you in this class? What do you want out of this? Encouraging students how to learn how to self-evaluate, encourage students to own, okay, here's what was going on for me with this, here's what I learned. And this isn't universal within the world of ungrading practices, but one of the big mantras is trust the students. And I'm really starting to think, what does that look like at a moment where, again, the knee-jerk reaction among the field, among higher ed has been the policing side of it. How do we make sure that students don't, just start taking advantage of this, running afoul, so on and so forth. But yeah, this kind of the trust building that a lot of us at liberal arts colleges are really committed to in our classrooms, whether we're ungrading or not. I'm wondering how that plays into all of that, where it does feel like the access has just gotten so much easier for students. Maybe some of them are already inclined to do this. Maybe some of them would have never considered this, but all of a sudden the low-hanging fruit just becomes a little too tempting. And, trying to think through what that's going to mean for those of us who have really been trained. Well, we're teaching the students' best selves and expecting them not to go there, and how we handle that. The thing I wanted to bring out from group 3, we talked a lot about ethical issues. We talked about how to support faculty and figuring all these things out. But I think one of the big questions we landed on is how much work and how much time is this going to be for us to effectively get ready for the fall? Because in some way, this, going back to what Mark was saying, it is starting to feel a little bit like the pandemic. The personal safety dimension is not, very much in play here, but the sense of how many tools am I going to have to learn in order to do this? Like, how many new tricks am I going to have in my tool bag in order to feel like I'm actually ready to do this fall? And like, does that mean that article doesn't get written this summer because now I need to, do that? And so that's just a kind of a big overarching, where there are many things that we're very seriously thinking about, but then there's also this, and how much is that going to take in order to do that?
Bianca?
Bianca.
Thanks. Just to piggyback on what Chris was saying, I think the word that came up the most in our discussion also was ethics. There's so many ethical issues are raised, but also the time saving thing. This didn't come up in our group, but this is just something I've been noticing in discussions. Like the benefits are all about, it's going to save us time. It's going to save us time. And it's actually not right now saving anybody any time, because we're going to have to learn how to use it. We're going to have to take time out of our classes to teach students how to use it. So that's my one comment. And then the other one is like saving us time to do what exactly? I mean, what is there? There's this assumption that if we give over certain tasks, certain things to AI, certain writing things, then we're going to have time for other stuff. But like, what is, I mean, I don't know, like, what is the stuff that we're imagining we're going to do in this luxurious space that we don't actually have, because we're all going to have to be using all of our extra time over the summer to learn how to do AI. And so I guess my comment is about like, man, I think the metaphors we're using, some of them anyway, to talk about the value and the benefits of AI are not realistic, I guess.
I see, Maggie, you're here. I know we're almost out of time.
I just wanted to say that a lot of issues around access and equity came up in our discussion too, both in how AI can put up barriers to access for students for different reasons, but also create access for students. And I just wanted to sort of, I don't know how this plays out, but, Ari, the discussion on the pandemic, for some of us, that sort of continuous having to adapt and learn hasn't changed. It's sort of still continuing. And so I think as somebody that is a big advocate for creating as much access as we can in our classrooms, access does take time and work. And it is, it can be extra work, and it can be rigorous, but it's really important for us to not leave our students behind and to make accessible learning environments, as opposed to accommodating students, just creating as much access as we can. And I think ultimately a lot of the discussion around AI is going to find itself somewhere in that arena, right, where it becomes part of how we try to create these more equitable, accessible environments. And I don't know exactly how it pans out. I'm really overwhelmed at the prospect, but I would like to see it be used in that way more than as a kind of tool of fear, is how we use it to create access in our classrooms.
I think we have one more.
A nice positive note. Oh, is there another person? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Karen.
Sorry, I just that point that you brought up, Maggie, is so like close to my heart that I can't help but unmute. So for a while now, one of the things that really bothers me, and I'm in the computer science department at DeSales, but my specialty is in digital art and 3D animation. So I have enough tech to like make me dangerous on the coding side, but not enough as some of my more traditional computer science colleagues. But one of the things that is very impassionate for me is that accessibility to the technology. So part of what I do, you know, you have to have the computer, you have to have the software in order to actually do this, and then you have to be trained. It's not something that is typically involved in the, you know, public school system in K through 12. So we get a lot of students who might not have had that versus students who might come from more affluent communities or households, what have you, who were able to buy the machine learning camp for their kid for the summer. And this is, you know, as much as I appreciate open source technology and how it is providing access to anybody, you still need some of those infrastructures, which is creating a more divided socioeconomic status, which to me just doesn't sit right. I mean, I consistently have enough computing power on my single person then brought us to the moon. But at the end of the day, that is because of the money that goes into it and my position as a faculty member. So and you know, the influence of cloud computing and 5G technology is very exciting to me, that we can bring some more of this technology to hands of many, many different people, but we're not there yet. And I think I talked briefly in chat before about how, you know, the idea of opening this up is really exciting because then it can be accessed by other people. And, you know, I think that access is just so hugely important. But right now, artificial intelligence is very much focused on how can we make money? How can we kind of sell this? And that's a problem for me because if those are the people who are developing it, that means that the people who don't have that structure within their person, the money capital, are going to be left behind or not included, which is a huge problem. So that to me is like the key aspect of trying to break down those barriers, because if we have more people at the table creating for this, it's going to be a better product.
And I think that's a good reminder to stay tuning into these sessions, because I know that Tracy and Ting Ting will be addressing some of those concerns with their session. We are at time. I don't know if folks want to continue the conversation, but I want to take a moment to recognize and thank again both Sharon and Mark for this presentation today, and everyone for your conversation and collaboration with each other, and look forward to seeing you on the call next week.
All right. Yes, thank you, everybody. Really appreciate you coming out, and the conversation has been fabulous.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
You.
All right.